Hey there, it's Margie Bryce here. And I offered this Zoom workshop conversation a few days ago. And I know there were some people that messaged me saying they wanted to attend and couldn't. And instead of trying to guess the best date and time, I thought it might be helpful if I recorded this for you. So here's the thing is that I will desperately miss the conversation with all of you. Uh, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. So I want us to think about what it means to lead in ministry in this kind of crazy election era. And I am going to hopefully help us to fly several thousand feet up in the air and have a different perspective. And my goal is always to help you to lead. And then that happens to mean that you have to lead yourself. Isn't that loads of fun? So I wanted to offer this to you as a way to think about what is going on around us and how we can be the people that God would have us to be in this kind of crazy, crazy, crazy time. Um, so I think I'm just going to dive right in here, and I will say this: feel free to message me on Facebook or email me. Some of you might even have my phone number and get a hold of me if you have any comments about this or would like to have an actual conversation. I'm good with that too. So, um, all of us are called by God to be in ministry. And as ministry leaders in this particularly divisive time, I would say that we need to be a purple person. That's rather simplistic sounding, I know. However, that is the whole red and blue, makes purple thing going on. We are to be kind of like Switzerland and deal with people who come at us with all their baggage and their life experiences and their desires and their thoughts, which, on the right Sunday can just about put you over the edge. But how we can kind of manage ourselves even within those kinds of situations. I think Romans 12:18 is a great place to start, a good guidance. It says, if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. And I'm going to talk some about how that might look in this crazy time because our goal is, to survive this season and help people do that with relationships intact, not just with us, but with the other people around them. We all need to be able to value our and treasure our relationships. And so we want to get through all of this in that way. So that's our challenge is how can we be purple people, as they would say. This era is about politics in our group discussion. It was really interesting that some of the thoughts that came were that politics is about legislative issues and tasks of doing all of that. I'm going to say that politics is about power, actually. And the way Jesus managed power was always very, very interesting. It's about power, and certainly who has it and who doesn't makes a difference. And even though you and I vote, there is a limit to our human power, and there's limit to human power in general. I mean, theologically, we do not have the power to effect salvation for anyone. We can't save ourselves. But it is important how we wield power. And I think we understand that um, as leaders who we lead people, but we also lead ourselves. That really is the first line of leadership, actually, is, I mean, if you won't follow you, then how do we think that other people are going to follow you? So there are limits to human power, but that is what politics is about who has power and who doesn't. And really, we have to remember and remind ourselves that's what this video is a grand reminder. That's what church is, right? A grand reminder. It's not that we don't know we should forgive someone. We just need to be reminded, because other stuff comes in and out of our heads. And sometimes we lose focus on the most critical pieces. And then zoom, there comes the reminder and you're like, oh yeah, why didn't I think of that? So how we handle power and our power and lead ourselves well, even though we are limited in our power, we certainly can't affect salvation, you and I, for anybody else. And we have to remind ourselves that our salvation doesn't rest in any particular person, other than Jesus Christ. And if you're anybody over, I don't know, I'm going to pick a random number here, so don't call me out on this. Anybody over 30, sort of starts to get the idea of, oh, elections happen and the results we may or may not like, and certainly we want to vote. At the end of the day, the outcome is up to God. God does put people's feet where they need to be at the certain times for certain reasons. And many times we don't know what that reason is, even though we certainly would like to know that. So we know that we may or may not like the results, but that the results change over time. You can have one group that wins an election, and the next time it swings to the other group, and it goes back and forth, and we're all still here mostly to talk about it. You know what I'm saying? We're all, I'm starting just to watch the pendulum swing back and forth, to be quite honest. But yeah, and politicians, I mean, they want to have influence. And that, I think influence is a nice way to say power, actually. I really do. But you want to do some reading about power and how power should be used. So there is a meme going around Facebook, which I think this is just helpful. I just do. It's a great reminder, again, to not lose relationships over people who don't even know your name, people who probably would not buy you a cup of coffee either. And that it's okay. It is okay to have different political views, different views of power and how it should be wielded and used, and then still maintain respect for, other people that are in our lives. So you don't want to let your relationship suffer. Now, I've found that some of my friends are better about having just conversation in general about politics. And I always like to know why people think what they're thinking. It's very interesting to me. But I do know there are some friends who are better at having those kinds of conversations than others. And I think you pick that up along the way. But relationships really are everything. And relationships depend on two people, right? And if one of them opts out, oh, well, and some of my friends go a little, let me go find a cave and I'll come out when the election's over, because they really just aren't up for having that kind of conversation. It just provokes too much anxiety. But we still want to remember that relationships are everything. I know we all know this, that the bus that used to drop people off in the 60s and 70s at church is no longer running, right? So when people come through the door, that is a divine appointment, right? But more than that, you need to build relationships with those people. If you want to have any key take on evangelism, that's it, is relationships. And the older you get, the more that you know and understand that relationships really are everything. And they truly are to be treasured. And then there's unity. If you were on the Zoom, I would ask you to put in a number of how many times over your lifetime that you've heard about unity and heard it preached. How often? I mean, I don't think it's very often. I think it should be. In John, in the later, much later verses in John, Jesus is captured talking a lot about unity and praying for unity, right before he's going to Calvary. He's talking about unity among the believers. And technically, our unity really is not defined by any political party. Here's a key thought, that unity does not mean uniformity. In fact, if we were all the same, I think it would be rather boring. I really like a lot of different ideas and people all gathered together. And I think that captures just a smidge of what Jesus was after. So I'm not sure, how often your church body speaks about unity that Jesus was referring to. But at the end of the day, the one thing that we all do hold in common, the unifying element for believers in Jesus, is Jesus. So we all bring our life experiences with us, and that, my friends, is frequently the lens through which people view their life, which that's a great diversity just right there. But Jesus is what we all hold in common. So here you go, 1 Corinthians 13. This is how we are to behave just in general. And here's kind of a cranky comment. There's way too much rude going on in the Christian circles. And whether it is towards one another or just, out on social media, it's like, oh my goodness, somebody needs to develop a rude meter or something and run around, instead of the fashion police, we'd have the rude patrol, maybe, I don't know. But there's an awful lot of rude going on. And when you look at this grand and practical definition of what love in action looks like, it's patient, kind, it's not jealous, envious, it's not proud or boastful. You're not setting yourself up and above other people, as in you look at other people and go, those idiots over there, I know way more than them. And frequently in this political climate, there's just way too much of that. And then love does not demand its own way. So there's a lot to unpack in this, and I'm not going to totally unpack it everywhere here, but not irritable or touchy, doesn't hold grudges, hardly even notices when others do it wrong. Gee, I'm just like this right here between unity and what love looks like. I think you could go way far with whatever kind of discussions you might have at church, but certainly even ministry leaders, we need this. We need this kind of reminder, especially when we want to look at people who have been rude to us or whatever. What is our response? Not reaction, but response. What is our response? How do we lead ourselves well as people who follow Jesus and, not even be an ounce of rude? This is some truths here that are on the slide, that the only person that you can control is yourself. Oh, rats. I think when I first learned this, that was a real big shock. A really, really, really big, big shock. Um, you know, you can't control them. You're not going to fix anything here. We are not going to fix anything. And yes, it is definitely frustrating. And there are ways that we can handle ourselves and diffuse with words like, I hear you. I hear you. I know. I know. And the one that I used frequently in my last ministerial post during a big transition time was, it'll be all right. I know, I know, I know. It's going to be okay. Because at the end of the day, what is going to have changed the day after the election is, really not much. Not much. I had friends that when they didn't like what the outcome of an election was, they wore black armbands for a while. And I'm like, I mean, there really are checks and balances in our system. Is it perfect? No. But we really are all going to be okay and be here at the end of the day. And I think there's really a lot of fear going on. And this is really interesting. I was at a seminar where Suzanne Stabile was speaking, and she is of Enneagram fame as somebody who understands it and meets it out really well. And somebody asked in the United States, what is the most predominant Enneagram number? And she said it's a 6. And I thought, well, this is interesting because if you dig a little bit at this, their trigger, if you want to call it that, is fear. They're highly motivated by fear. And it was over 50%. And I thought, because my background was marketing and advertising, I thought, oh my goodness, this explains so much. This explains why it is when you see ads, it's like, you got to hurry and reply by today, or this special offer isn't any good. You've got to stir up people's fear, whether it's fear of missing out or fear of missing the boat or just fear in general. And there's a whole lot of fear being ramped around. And I think scripture is pretty clear about what we need to do with fear. And it's not be led around by the nose by fear. I can say that. That might be another thing you might want to preach about. I'm going to talk some here briefly just about conflict, because as a ministry leader, you lead both conservative, so supposed conservative, and you lead people with more liberal leanings. And we are for sure in a challenging culture right now. But as a leader here, what is your role here? And how are you going to respond to situations? Because at the end of the day, your congregation is never going to grow beyond where you are. And that's kind of important. It really is. Further, in our culture here in North America, it's extra important to be right. Another mind blower, this is in seminary. One professor said that there are actual places on the planet where being right that's nothing. It doesn't add to the equation. It doesn't subtract from the equation. It is just nothing. And I just thought, I can't even fathom that. I just could not even fathom that, because it's extra important to be right here in North America, which then, if you're right, then it always implies that the other side is wrong, or you demonize them, or you see them as less intelligent for their choices. And some of that's just the nature of what is going on right now. And everybody likes to be right. We like to be the one to set ourselves above others. And some Christian people seem to be so rabid about their ideas and choices that, boy, you'd think their salvation was like on the line or something. And I have to tell you, I should have said this at the beginning. I did do this disclaimer at the beginning when I did this workshop. It's like I have a spiritual gift of being able to offend everybody in the room with one fell swoop. Whether you are blue or red or purple or I can just offend everybody with one big statement. And I think some of this is that. But there are some Christian people that really think that their ideas and choices are just so far above everybody else's. And again, I'm speaking to everybody, everybody across. This is just who we are as people. And this does set us up for inevitable conflict. Now, here's a new definition of conflict that I recently learned. And that conflict is the gap between reality and what you want to have happen. It's the gap between reality and what you want to have happen. So, and we want everybody to think like us, because we're all right? All of us. But you and I know it is a physical impossibility for everybody to be right all the time. Just like it's a physical impossibility to not offend everybody or anybody ever along the way. Somebody's going to be offended. Somebody's not going to be right. We swim in that. But I want to read, though, to you from Philippians 2. And it's Philippians 2, 3 and 4 is what I'm going to read to you, because this is where we need to be. We need to be here. Do nothing, Paul says to the church at Philippi, do nothing out of selfish ambition. And I'm going to stop right there and take, a pastoral privilege moment. This passage I dug at heavily for my doctoral dissertation, and selfish ambition is indeed a political kind of descriptor. And selfish ambition means you are climbing literally over the backs of other people to get to where you want to go. Okay. It was you're competitive. Actually, competition is indeed the antithesis of humility. If you didn't already know that, it's a good reminder. Competition, this is a heavy competitive environment that we all live in and swim in. So verse 3, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value others above yourselves, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the other. And Paul's always good at that, where you kind of get this picture where you can see people at a door and somebody opens the door and it's after you. No, after you. No, after you. No, after you. I don't know how you saw that, but that's kind of the attitude that is going to be the most helpful here, is to see other people above yourself when we're dealing with them. Now, are we wanting to stir up the conflict? Not really. How many pastors here, raise your hand, that would like to have more drama at church? Oh, Lord help us. So, I've also come to some other interesting definition for compassion, which means to struggle with. It really made me ask myself some questions. I know of someone that lost their job, and I feel like I've been compassionate towards them. But when you put the words, are you struggling with that person? Oh, man, I have to really rethink that. I have to really rethink how well I'm struggling with, because as I said, we're all in this soup together, you know, we really are all in this soup together. And I know that many times we are trained then as ministry leaders to do the non anxious presence, and say, you know, it will be fine. It will be okay. I know, I know, I know, I know. Um, but I also want to just take a moment then, um, to bring some of these topics to mind here, like compassion and how well we struggle with one another. And let's all just get through this together, shall we? And how some of these concepts can just help us have a better perspective, or go find a better, you know, sometimes I have to go looking for a better perspective, but hopefully some of this will help us get there. So I want to ask a couple of really super practical questions. And, you know, one of them, and some of these topics actually can be used to foster conversation, but what is your church's policy? Isn't that high, dry, and interesting? What is your church's policy for how it handles elections? And again, you can use some of these terms, concepts to help guide discussion and come to a place where your church board adopts a policy, and it can help feed why they're adopting the kind of policy that they are. I mean, we are supposed to be like Switzerland. We are supposed to be like purple people. And, you know, I know there are different places in the country where different things happen within the worship service. And this probably comes out of my Catholic roots, but, you know, I'm kind of picky about what goes down during worship. And, you know, as ministry leaders, if you're pastoring, you also have that discretion for what does and does not go down in that sanctuary, in that worship space. So I think the worship space needs to remain purple, even though I know there are places in the country where that isn't the case. I Can you host an event? Probably. But again, I would do it as purple as you can, meaning if you're going to offer one side to say something, you need to offer the other side to come in and have equal time there. So once you have adopted a church policy, and I don't know how quickly your group could create something for this one, but it's not like there's never going to be another one either. How is it communicated to your people? So what this is going to do is ask you to create an inventory of all the means of communication that you actually use, and then choose many of them, as many as possible, to repeatedly communicate to your people, because then it becomes a little easier to have that as, well, here, this is what we have decided we're about here, and this is how we're going to handle this era. So again, urge your people to vote, would you? I'm deeply disturbed that about half of us are voting. You know, I think you still got time to register. So urge your people to vote. But here's some other questions that I want to leave us with. I mean, for one, how can you amp down the rhetoric? How can you be purple? How can you be that place where, you know, you're not going to answer all of anybody's questions and sort all of this out. It's way too complicated. It's very complex. But how can you lead and respond in such a way that you are offering peace? And here you go. Now I'm thumbing through the slides here, but how can you be a peaceful kind of leader to be reassuring to people and understand their frustration, not understand, but understand why they are frustrated. But still then be purple. But here's the last slide, and this is really the kicker. As a rule, ministry leaders, pastors in particular, tend to be fixers. How can you be okay with not being able to fix other people's aggravations? Can you be okay with not being able to fix this for people? I mean, you think about the era in which Jesus walked the earth and the maybe time immediately after, and there's been various times in history where just things have just been messy and nasty. Um, there's a lot of things we can't fix, but we can help people turn to God. We can model to people what love and compassion look like and what unity needs to look like, and always hold those kinds of concepts up for people to consider. So, as people approach you, and they will, note kind of the speed and tone that they're speaking in. I mean, if it's really fast and, you've had people approach you like that, I'm sure, then you know that there's some real high anxiety at play there, and see what you can do to have a soft answer to try to soothe that harsh tone. That would be Proverbs 15:1 is what I'm sort of looking at there, and look at how you can amp down the rhetoric just a bit here and try to model something else. How can we still be God's people when things are challenging, when things are aggravating, when people are aggravating you? How can we then kind of amp down? As always, I'm going to say that we need to double down on the self-care. And there's always an assumption on my part when I say that you are also attending to your spiritual life, because that's what we do. We help people with their spiritual lives. So hopefully we're helping ourselves with our spiritual lives as well. You can't just say, you go do that, and then I'm not gonna. So I always assume that, okay, just to be fair. But also, we need to be good stewards with the bodies and the selves, the little selves that God has given to us, and take a moment to attend to our emotional and mental and physical needs. And especially in high stress kind of environments, you need to definitely double down on that, because you're being a good steward with what God gave you. And God certainly knows that we have limitations, for sure. So, and you want to be the person that is able to love others. And as Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. So that kind of means if you're not loving yourself, how well are you loving your neighbor? And maybe that's kind of a hint into some of our lack of compassion these days towards one another. Just saying. I know Friedman would say, if you do family systems, that we are a society in regression at the moment. And, to make it really clear, I think on social media, especially, the main game there is complaining. How well can you gripe and complain and tell other people that they're wrong, and on and on and on. So, the soup is thick to swim in. So make sure that you are attending to your spiritual selves, and then also make sure that you are doing some healthy self-care so that you too can survive and be the kind of purple person that Jesus would want us to be. So that's it for me. And I hope this helps and helps to give us a little bit more fuel for the journey. So be blessed, my friends.